This the Black Powder Podcast. Kick up your feet, lean on your armrest, and get your mind blessed on this conquest. Hold a grip like a 12 gauge, let this moment kick. Black people moving and having some gun ownership. I carry weight, not to keep the camera safe. It's thinking about you, my kids and my parents' faces. The big topics, they don't wanna involve us. Think we're novice, but now we're moving hard with revolvers. This the Black Powder Podcast, let's get it started.
Primers hit, the powder is lit. It's time to get on target. Welcome to another episode of the Black Powder Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Yasuke Fett. And just a general reminder of your marching orders and why we have created the Black Powder Podcast. The main mission is to change the social view of black society and firearms. How do we do that? Glad you asked. We talk, walk, read, write, and think about it to find a better solution for a brighter future for the proper protection of black people. Join us through education, practice, and safety as we take down the stigma of black people and guns, one discussion at a time. Just a general reminder, you cannot do a mag dump without a couple of rounds. So if you like what you're hearing and you happen to like this show, send out an email to blackpowderpodcast@gmail.com and let me know what your favorite episode is. Whether or not you agree, disagree, or have questions, please make sure to send them to blackpowderpodcast@gmail.com. And always, feel free to like, share, and subscribe. The only way to continue to grow is to continue to share this knowledge with other people. And the only way to even get the message out is to let everyone know. So once again, if you like what you heard and would like to continue to hear, please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, you can find us on multiple platforms, especially main ones. As of recently, we are now on Spotify, Apple iTunes, Google Podcast, Amazon Music, and Audible.
Absolutely. Good afternoon. I am Tricia Perkins, the owner of Learn CPRATL, and I am a Red Cross certified training instructors, licensed training provider with the American Heart Association. I am a certified instructor, and I'm also a national level training center with this Health and Safety Institute. And I've been doing this for about 6 years. And it started out just the North Georgia area, but I'm literally driving to Columbus tomorrow. And I've been actually all over Georgia and North Carolina now. So that's me, just getting people trained. And what do you do in that emergency situation?
You think you covered everything? It seems like a lot. Well, first question I have for you is, what inspired you to become a certified AED, CPR, first aid instructor?
Absolutely. So I have been getting certified just for job responsibilities for several jobs that I've worked with. And I was doing safety and security when I worked with the IKEA organization. And I just thought that was so cool. I was like, oh, he just comes and teaches a class. And that actually led me into training and development, which my degree is in human resources. So that has been the leg of human resources I've gone into. But I was on sabbatical from work in 2017, 2018. And I went to get renewed, and I had the amazing instructor, Mr. Billy G. And he was telling us, like, it's his last class. He's been teaching for 40 years and he's ready to put his feet up. And I was like, wow, like, you're that fun of a teacher. Best class I'd ever taken. And then, you know, he was telling us his stories of being an instructor all this time. And I just started asking more questions. And he was like, oh yeah, the instructor's class is going to be next week. You got to make sure you come, 2 days, because it's an extended course. There's a lot more coursework involved in the instructor level. And I was like, I'm going to be at that class, whether I just get to teach on the weekends or if this is something that I can like go ahead and continue with as a business. I'm in.
Cool. That sounds like it's a really interesting thing to do, especially like whenever you are that type of instructor that can just instantly connect with people. It's a lot better than being like the teacher off of Ferris Bueller's Day Off. You just show up and you're like, this is what we're going to study. Class. You know?
I got to tell you, I think that is still what people are expecting. And I think you and I talked about this when you came to my class. That I was not going to be that Ben Stein teacher, and I get a lot out of the different organizations and the different types of learners that I get to teach with. But I got to tell you, training is my thing. Any job I've ever worked in, I have become a trainer. And so being able to be an instructor and really sit on the saddle of that that's been the best part.
Yeah, that's definitely great to hear. And I really, you do have the personality for that too, by the way. It's like you just reach out and like just get past people's, I guess, like the walls they might put up. It reminds me of like another guy that I'm trying to work with right now. His channel is Armed Atlas. He interviewed a lady that deals with police officers and PTSD, and her biggest challenge was like getting past that, the exterior of like the typical personality or the stereotypical personality that they portray of cops. It's like, we don't have time for that. PTSD is not a real thing.
Yeah.
And like
Yeah.
it gives you a chance to like introduce new methods and new ways to like relate to people that you think you wouldn't be able to relate to. So I'd say you're pretty good at that. So here's another question for you. Can you share a memorable experience where your skills in AED, CPR, first aid training made a significant impact or saved someone's life?
Okay, so I haven't been able to receive reports back of students that had to activate their skills when they weren't a BLS student, the basic life support for healthcare professional classes, which I also teach. But the biggest impact that I have been able to observe has been for two types of students. The first is the Eagle Scout, and we see Eagle Scouts every spring, and a lot of them are just now getting into the active portion of their development, where it's them choosing something and them being responsible, and then they have dad with them as like an ever-present consultant, but it really is on them. And this is like the prerequisite class that they're taking because they've got to do wilderness over the summertime. And seeing them shift from, oh, I don't know if I can do this, to, okay, I'm going to be the one people can rely on just in that 2 hours. That to me, I think is amazing, because, if you end up in a disaster and somebody says, oh, I was an Eagle Scout, you're kind of like, great. we can work with that. Nobody's ever upset an Eagle Scouts around. And then the second type of student where I think that I have made the impact have been the recent graduates who either just got a job or are in that process about to step into their career field or step into their job. And this is just one of the things on their checklist that they needed to get done to be either eligible for that job or to go ahead and finish their onboarding. And this right at the beginning of something, I think anytime that you're instilling a capability in someone or reinforcing skills with them, you're preparing them. But sometimes, and this is the coach in me, I think that kicks up with my instructor, sometimes people don't know or don't have confidence to add to their capabilities or their competence. And so being able to pick up, okay, what are people good at? We've got this student who feels like they're at the bottom of the ladder of their career. They've got some skills. There's something in them that if I can pick up on that in this class, they can start getting those early wins. And then the next level that they go to or next requirement they have to, hurdle they have to jump over, they feel like this class was a win and they leave feeling empowered. Some of them have added me on LinkedIn and I've gotten to, hit celebrate when they get their job or, when they get that next promotion. And those have been, in 6 years, it's been maybe about 7, but they will never leave me.
That sounds like you're doing a good job then. And I'm not even going to lie. I think it's like, it was sometime near the end of last year. I was on vacation in Aruba and I was coming back. And it was already kind of weird because the flight was delayed. So I'm like, oh, okay. So then we get in the air. All of a sudden, you hear over the PA system, passengers of flight Is there anyone that is a doctor or has any CPR experience? And I'm like, oh god, okay, here we go. Let me try to remember everything that happened. But then, hey, this doctor got up from all the way in the back, and I said, you know what? My skills and his, I think we're gonna let him work, but at the same time, because I mean, it'll be. I think you have to kind of read the situation too. But I mean, I was ready to utilize the skills, but I know in my case, it's like flight attendants do have CPR training as well as AED, and they're supposed to at least. So I think if I would have hopped up there and everybody else is in the same situation, I might have been in the way. So I kind of looked at it like let the more experienced professionals handle it. But the fact that I was able to just instantly kind of click in my mind that I was actually trained on this, it did give me confidence. Versus like, who's gonna get up and take care of it? Yeah.
I am so grateful to hear the details of that story, and thank you for sharing with me like from your civilian perspective on that. And we talked about in class about the bystander effect. We talked about in class about the Good Samaritan law. And when you get into that moment, you do that own like self-assessment of like, okay, where am I actually going to fit in here? I imagine that in that situation, if you were observing a doctor, moving forward with their skills and activating, and you're seeing other flight crew members doing so, if you were to approach and say, I'm trained in first aid, CPR, AED, I can take instruction and I can help. Remember when we did our role-playing skills exercise, we had to go through all of those steps of, okay, you looked at the situation, yep. You kind of, like you said, you read the room, okay, and what's going on. And sometimes, as you saw, like you need more than two hands. If you're doing the compressions, you have to have somebody else to open up the AED or to open up the first aid kit so they can, bandage that little cut on their arm. And so like, there's so many jobs, right? Like when you activate skills and you even just paying attention and just, even though you're like quietly observing, they had like an extra safety net of another person that can jump in and help and like know what to do. And I don't know if you do this, but I sit in the exit seat when I get on airplanes now, because I know like typically first responders are a little burdened and they're like, oh man, it's gonna be me. But I'm like, okay, I am the queen of the lay people. And if I can just open the door, that's one more thing off of the plate of the skilled provider. And they can, do the tracheotomy with a ballpoint pen, right? Yes. So I don't know if anybody else thinks that way, but I do. I'll open the door.
It's and I say it's a good mindset to have, in a sense. It's like you're placing yourself in the, I guess you could say, the most pivotal point of situational awareness. So like whether you need to get up and help out or whether you just need to open the door, like you said, you're there. So it's almost like you're kind of giving yourself the whole responsibility of the flight, in a sense. You are the door person. You will hold the door. Yeah.
Well, every little bit helps. But we've all seen those like those disaster movies, and there's only one person that knows CPR, and they turn to the other person who is petrified, and they're like, okay, count to 2 and squeeze the bag, or put your hands like this, and they're like trying to explain CPR to someone. But the more, and I've said this since I got certified as an instructor, and I will die on this hill, the more bystanders that are trained, the better outcomes for everyone. Whether we have that bystander effect where people think the only thing I can do to help is to make sure I document it or to stay out of the way. But when you have that training, you're a little bit more informed. If you had noticed, there were a lot more things that you as a trained person are going to notice and make a decision about than an untrained person. Everybody needs to get certified. Everybody.
I can agree with that. So that brings me to more of a in-depth question about that, since you mentioned that. What unique challenges or barriers, if any, do you think the Black community faces when it comes to assessing and receiving proper CPR, AED, and first aid training? Like, do you think there might be some type of stigma there? Do you think that The average person would be like, just dial the number and let the quote unquote professionals handle it. I mean, what do you think?
I think I've observed two, maybe three groups of African Americans when it comes to are they going to get certified? They work in a helping professional and they know what to do. And it's their nature also to be the one that knows what to do and to take charge. And they have a natural leadership about them. Usually, people in those jobs, that's already in their personality. The other is that they know that they have high risk pathologies in their families and they want to be prepared or to help, but they are either dealing with it themselves or, they're just really scared about their family members. So they just want it to not happen. And they err on the prevention instead of the mitigation side. CPR training, being trained is mitigating the problem, right? And then the third is accessibility. I can't tell you how many students will say like, oh yeah, I did that in high school, not in high school health class, but because they were on a certain track and they were in health occupations and they took there's an abbreviated version for high school students. And then they never thought about it again. And then something happens and they're like, I was so scared and I just didn't know what to do. And I just figured I would go ahead and just take the class. Or their employer is requiring it and they're like, oh man, I should have done this before. This is really valuable. But it wasn't either available, it wasn't in the conversation. And so like entering that into the conversation, I think is huge. And normalizing it, I think is huge because there's so many more skills than compressions and breaths, right? And being able to add those because unfortunately, in the climate of our nation, anything can go wrong at any time. Right. And we have been hearing the repeat of like gun violence in the Black community of like, okay, well, he got shot and we called 911, but everyone was so hysterical, no one knew what to do, or they were only able to just put pressure on it and they weren't able to do the other steps, right? And so I'm curious of how many of those mistake shootings that we hear about, like kids finding guns or, like, oh, he was just trying to show him something. It was New Year's Eve and, somebody got shot. How many of those could have been mitigated if we had that simple training throughout of where people know like, oh, okay, it really isn't that much and it's very simple and I can do this. More people in the crowd that can step forward, it matters. And I think in the Black community, there's just so much that we don't know that we don't know. Yeah. And being able to like enter it into the conversation it makes all the difference.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. The third group of people really that you spoke of really stands out to me the most because it kind of reminds me of what's called the Dunning-Kruger effect, where it's like when, say for example, we use firearms, right? Somebody goes out, they purchase their first firearm, and instead of like paying for additional training or becoming familiar with their firearm, they instantly put themselves into the shoes of John Wick or Rambo or like name your Arnold Schwarzenegger movie of choice, and then they're like, I got this. But in that same situation, like you said, whenever something happens, that false sense of security or bravado, ego, whatever terminology you'd like to use, it melts away, and then they just snap back to reality so quick to the point where they don't know what they're doing. And if it's a situation where they might have accidentally shot somebody, not only are they dealing with the first step of reality, like I caused this problem, now it's like the second step of reality, I don't know how to fix it. So I definitely agree that, more people need to become more familiar with it. And I know, like in my case, taking a class actually made me start looking at myself even more. And I'm like, I got to get my health back on point because, just because I know CPR, God forbid, if I have like a stroke or something, doesn't mean that I can give myself CPR. or like what is it? Like the James Bond movie Casino Royale. Like I'm not going to be sitting there with the AED device trying to hook it to myself until I can, apply shock to myself. Movies are great, but it
Yeah.
doesn't work like that in real life. So I definitely agree with that mindset.
I know you're interviewing me, but I do have a question for you. I don't know if we call it a marksman, someone who is skilled in shooting. Um, what were some of the responses to some of your colleagues at the range when you were discussing getting trained in first aid and CPR?
So here's the funny thing, and that's an interesting question. There's a lot of drama behind the gun club I'm in right now. Not the local chapter I'm in, which is Bass Reeves, but the more the root chapter, if you will, or excuse me, the root basically the root of the gun club, if you will. But nonetheless, I'll stick with Bass Reeves because I do still support them.
Okay.
But actually, let's just say overall in general, everybody has been pushing every single member to go take a stop to bleed class or a CPR class or just in general first aid. There was a lot of importance placed upon it. There was a lot of significance behind it, especially seeing as how one of the things that made me want to get more into it was, and I'm still down this journey, but rather is me still wanting to become a licensed firearm instructor. One of the, not saying it's all of them, but one of the sad things about firearms instructors is like if they just go and they try and score the minimum or whatever, and they don't really have, like we talked about earlier, that type of personality to connect with their students, it might fall into a realm of I'm just here to get a paycheck and make money. So now safety's outside of the box of where you're supposed to be at. You're missing your target, no pun intended, but it is what it is. You're missing your target, and you're not educating your students properly. And not on top of that, you're putting your students into a danger zone. So if you are not certified in any type of first aid, especially stop to bleed in this case, you're only putting more and more people at risk.
Mm.
And honestly, that's not really the best way to train anybody in firearms or just in life. The more people you put at risk and the less responsibility you place into your own hands, it's just a bad combination. But overall, to answer your question, it's highly pushed. It's highly placed as a step of importance, and if anything, it kind of goes hand in hand with the whole mission of Bass Reeves in general. So it's like you're kind of championed if you know how to do it, and I can really respect that.
Well, I'm so grateful that you went into that detail about the dynamics of an instructor. I don't think we got to talk about this in depth before, but when I was going to take lessons at the range, um, I had a very bad experience with an instructor.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody was so shocked. They were like, oh, he's the best one here. He was the best marksman. However, he was very green when it comes to learning disabilities, learning styles, all the other things that need to facilitate a student to be able to learn well. He just didn't have that yet in his skill set. And so they moved me with another instructor who had been a football coach. And that's a whole different set of skills that he was able to apply that to being able to shoot. Now, football itself is quite dangerous. So he had another layer of respect and responsibility just from his own background with that. But turns out, I didn't know this before, but my Moro reflex, I cannot keep myself from closing my eyes and jumping at loud sounds. And so I needed I'm not just going to be the student that comes and we're going to do 2-3 hour sessions and I'm good. I really have to extend that because of the extra care that I have to be able to take when shooting. And whether you're intending to shoot or you're making that mistake with your firearm, it can be devastating, right? Like, even if you just grazed somebody, they're going to have that PTSD from that. And then being able to like respond to that and stop that bleeding is so important. I want to suggest to you, and we may have talked about this before, but the active violence emergency response training, which is the active shooter class from the Health and Safety Institute. I think that it would be an excellent addition to the instructor training of how to disarm someone. When you take that class, you're not only learning about shield and cover and the tactics of maneuvering in an office when there's an active shooter, but they actually teach you how to approach and take a long gun from the person, and actually how to take a handgun from the person. And this is for laypersons, which that is, I think, the scariest part of the class for the laypersons. But I think an instructor being able to speak into that is from an instructor point of view, I think that's a perfect crossroads. You guys being able to, do both ends of it, right? The intentional shooting, and then how are you responding with the unnecessary or unrequired shooting?
Mm-hmm. I probably will look into that class. And it's funny you mentioned that, because ever since I've gotten more involved in firearms and applying the aspects of first aid in a situation like that, because at my workplace there's posters are plastered everywhere. It is ridiculous. And I mean, to be blunt, you can't even really escape from somebody's posters. Like, you go to the restroom and there's literally a poster right in front of you as you're trying to do what you got to do. It's like kind of poster overload, right?
Okay.
Sorry to go into full detail about that. It's like but one of the posters that actually caught my attention was the active shooter poster, and it was basically like run, hide, or fight if you don't have any alternative. And a couple of my coworkers are like, well, what if we have firearms in our vehicle and we're actually willing to go back in to start rescuing people? Now, I know I could see so many issues occurring from that, ranging from like you hitting one of your coworkers by mistake, or you losing your own life. That's why there's so many videos on YouTube that tell you, let's say, for example, if you're shopping in Walmart or Kroger or whatever, they tell you that if there's somebody that comes in with the intent to cause harm, you don't turn yourself into a hero, because just because you see one active shooter doesn't mean that there's not like 2, 3, 4, or however many left. But what concerned me is I don't really think there was a lot of people that might have been at the very least CPR certified. I could be wrong. It is a big corporation. I really do hope I'm wrong, but just that made me wonder. It's like, if something happens and there's nobody really there to apply CPR, or, just try and stop the bleed, or any of the above techniques that are necessary in order to, maintain a life, then, I really think that it needs to be refined. There needs to at least be like some document or something that says, John Smith is certified, Everett is certified, Caitlin is certified, so on and so forth. So
Yeah. I will speak into two parts of that. One, about retrieving your firearm from your vehicle in an emergency, and then the second about the safety committees and health and safety plans that I'm starting to see pop up for my organizational classes. I believe it was 1992, the Luby's massacre in Killeen, Texas. Well, I'm from Killeen, Texas. It was about 1.5 miles away from my elementary school. And one of the workers, I will never forget this. We saw her on the news. She served us when we went to that Luby's, and she said, my gun was in my car, and I didn't carry it on me because I could lose she was a dentist. Like she said, I could lose my license for, making a mistake with that rule or not following that rule. And all I could think the whole time when they shot my parents is if I could just get to my car, I could come back. And she did go into the Texas legislature because you cannot, if you get out, you get out. But that run, hide, or fight, we cannot stress that enough. You're going to do one of those three things. And that's going to save your life. And it potentially is going to save another person's life who may be trying to follow you and not being as successful. But the way to respond to that is to get involved with voting and understanding the gun rights and gun laws in your area, because those do connect to when somebody is in a crowd and they're trying to figure out what to do and how seriously people will take the training that they do have. From responses I've had from students, they say if they didn't know what to do, they've seen things in movies and television and they'll try to do that. But as you and I talked about before, what they're doing in movies and television is not actual CPR. It's not going to necessarily be effective because they're having to change it for the camera. So once again, everybody needs to get certified. And then the second thing, I was telling you that I am training at a lot of our government institutions now. I also have a contract where I'm going to many of Georgia's manufacturing plants. And so a lot of them, this is about the time in their company cycle where their boomers are starting to retire and they have a new health and safety manager or leader who is having to come up with the program. One of the plants that I've been going to, he's very optimistic and he's building out the program from scratch. But because so many people, I think he said like 86% of their workforce had worked there for more than 30 years. And they just weren't having accidents. They stopped counting the days that they weren't having accidents because it's the same people who learned how to not mess things up and get hurt 25 years ago, and they're still not getting hurt 30 years later, right? So now as people are retiring, they're having new people come in. This is their first jobs. This is their second jobs. It may be something that is different and everybody is at a much higher risk. And so I've been going, I think he had me come and do 4 different classes in January. I'm back in June to do the other shift for that staff. So he has more than one person on each shift that is trained. And then anybody, like that is the baseline he's requiring for his plant. And I'm seeing that more and more and more with these larger manufacturing organizations and these larger operations. I think offices, they're coming along a little slower, but most of their students are ending up in our community classes. So it's either a plant or a national organization who is saying like, hey, we're building out our health and safety team from scratch. And so we're starting with this baseline and, making a plan and setting expectations. We're seeing a lot of, in addition to Stop the Bleed, the bloodborne pathogens certification class that people know how to handle themselves when, they get exposed to infectious material or other body fluids. But I think it's going to be slow coming, but these managers are taking it seriously. And every time I hear one saying like, oh yeah, I just got in this role about six months ago and I was doing my research. I can't tell you how many times I've heard that. And I'm just so energized that in this last 6 years that I've been instructing, it's been more and more. And this year has been more.
I'm really glad to hear that too, especially in like a manufacturing type of environment, because it's so easy for someone to get hurt. I've actually been in an environment like that where, I mean, there's so much around you. There's so many things that can hurt you. Even if you just kind of slightly brush against something, you're going to end up getting a cut or something. And you're like, oh, okay. Well, I didn't expect that, But yeah. I really, I guess it's almost like, as far as the office environments, it's almost like a false sense of security. Matter of fact, one of the phrases I use is safety is the illusion of human comforts. So it's like every it's like everybody is like, okay, cool. As long as I get to my house, I'm safe. Or as long as I get here, I'm safe. As long as I get to whatever location where people think they're going to be safe, as long as they get there, they have that false sense of security. More people need to realize that, or rather just respect their own mortality. That's another thing I say, because, it's real easy for teenagers to be like that. They could literally grow a new limb or whatever. Meanwhile, we're getting older, and, we think a little bit more about stupid things as we start getting older. It's like, yeah, I used to be able to do that, but I don't think I can do that anymore. So I really think the opposite environment needs to pick up on that.
I appreciate you bringing up that point. I saw a headline and I was too mortified to read the rest of the article. Maybe I'll go back and read it, but it was saying that the staff took a selfie with a coworker that they thought was sleeping. And he had gone into cardiac arrest and had passed. And so they thought he was just sleeping in his chair. They couldn't wake him up. But when you're certified, you learn the signs. You learn the sounds of like that agonal breathing of like, okay, that breathing's not right. Or, okay, that skin is starting to look pale and ashen. Okay, I don't see his chest rising and falling. Those are things that now in a glance that would have told you like, oh no, he's not sleeping. This is a problem. Or he may have been, they thought he was snoring before and that was him, losing his respirations. So it's just those little tiny things that you learn that will never leave you and will almost seem apparent, right? Like if you were on the subway or the MARTA and you saw somebody sleeping, I bet you would just notice or try was rising or not. And you just do that in a millisecond, but because and you had that in your training. But without that was a whole group of team members who thought, oh, this is just a funny joke, like he's sleeping at work. That's not, something we do. This is so weird. And it really turned out to be something quite serious. And we need more bystanders who are trained, whether they take that action or not. But even noticing if somebody's chest is rising and falling, that falls under first aid.
And I hate to say it, but on that note, I really think that because it was already bad enough before social media, the news platforms and every other source of media would kind of censor people as far as the, I guess you could say, noticing what other people might be going through. But now here we have with social media, and it's just kind of made everybody a little bit more stupid or a little bit less aware of issues that somebody else might be going through. I've lost a couple of coworkers in that blue collar job I was working, and I've also heard that there were a few people that literally died after they were done with the shift. They were standing there waiting on a bus stop. They went into cardiac arrest.
Widowmakers.
Yeah, and nobody really knew what to do. Just like you said, on the MARTA system or the DART system or wherever you're at, you could be doing something, especially if you're a bystander that is willing to do that. But some people are just more interested in taking selfies or taking pictures or videos just for likes, comments, and subscriptions. That's not really humane. That's not what we should really be focusing on. I mean, there's so much other stuff going on in like other countries, whether they're third world, second world, whatever, that even a basic bystander would stop and try and get somebody some help. But you come over here and it's just kind of like the land of social media. Whatever's going to help me get more notoriety or whatever, that's what I'm going to focus on. And it's funny the story you brought up of the Lubies in Texas. It's funny you bring that up because I was born in Texas. And
yeah, me too.
You said Lubies. I'm like, yeah, man. That sounds good.
We haven't thought about Lubies in 25 years.
Right. They just now putting Whataburgers out here, you know? I mean, it's all right. It's not like...
Yeah, there's one on I saw it when I was driving back from North Carolina, and I was like, I think I need to take a detour.
I think I know the one you're talking about. Yeah, matter of fact, when I was going to North Carolina, it was like it was a little bit before the border, I think.
Maybe
And
it's Livonia or up by Lake Hartwell, maybe.
that
I could be
sounds...
calling it wrong. Shout out to Whataburger.
But
All right,
it sounds...
man, tell me what you're saying.
Whataburger. Yes. No, but, so I remember that story, actually. I think the lady, she went up in front of some politicians at the end of it. I think it was because Luby's was a no gun zone, if you will. And she left a gun in the car, like you said. She usually carries it in the purse. She had a chance to get the drop on that person, but when she reached into her purse, she had nothing. So then her parents passed away. I think there's like a difference between somebody that is going to be a hero by choice and somebody that has the opportunity to take advantage of a situation given to them, whether they are reluctant to take advantage of it or not. Basically, in her situation, she had a chance to become that necessary hero, but she couldn't take it because she didn't have the necessary tools. Versus, like, I think it's Actor Protection on YouTube. They show so many videos of so many people failing at trying to put themselves in a hero role because, again, the Dunning-Kruger effect. Like, I got a gun, I can do it. Like, no. And that's why they're not with us anymore. So that can apply to first aid as well. It's like if you've got the skills, you can put yourself into that situation. Or you've got the skills, you can leverage that situation. You just have to be conscious of it and willing to do that versus like trying to apply that movie CPR. And yeah, nobody's just going to pop up from the dead if you do that. If anything, I think it's only going to make it worse. And it's funny that we're talking about movies. There was a Alec Baldwin movie that actually got put on hold. It's called Rust, and that was the one where, it was the one where the armorer, who literally is the person that is they're responsible for looking after the firearms and making sure that the firearms function properly, making sure that they separate blanks from live rounds, which I don't know why there'd be a need for live rounds on set anyway, but nonetheless, Alec Baldwin ended up shooting somebody because the armorer was negligent. She was put in that position due to nepotism. Her father was an armorer in many movies before the one she was working on, and he was trying to get her into the business. So actually, it was a film before Rust, now that I think about it, but nobody stopped her on the first one. Because Nicolas Cage almost got shot in the head because of her negligence.
I think that's how Jason Lee died when he was doing The Crow too.
Yeah,
I think it was the sequel to The Crow, but it was supposed to be blanks, and they just shot him, and people were surprised, dumbfounded. I can't even say outraged because they were like, "Wait, what? Why would you even have live rounds for a movie?" You know, like the public doesn't have knowledge about things like that. Taking your time to get this type of extra training preemptively, I don't know the psychology on it, but I gotta say, I think it changes your brain. And when we hear the I survived stories where somebody had to jump in and they did what we would call a hero, they're psychologically injured by that.
Yeah.
They're not saying like, I got him. I got that guy. They're devastated that they killed a person. They're grateful that they were able to end the situation. But and I think it's the reluctant leader, the one that ends up being the most successful, right? That person who is like trying to get the attention or the power grab. We fall right into that Dunning-Kruger, right? And we're missing those most important parts of that. I would like to teach the world CPR. or help people understand. I don't know if we talked about this. I took a break. I was consulting for another firm for it was like a year contract. So I was like, okay, I'll just take a break from, CPR, no big deal. And it was like maybe 9 months into that, and Damar Hamlin went into cardiac arrest on the field. And I think I called one of my contracts that same week. It must have been that next Monday, I think, to say like, hey, I'm coming back. Go ahead and put me on the schedule. Everybody saw that happen to that man, and he's home with his family now. And I know those were paid trainers, but that could have been just on the field on Thanksgiving, right? Where they're just in the backyard and something had happened. More people need to know. And I think we're going to see an uptick in registrations. And we absolutely did see an increase in our community classes, because people were realizing like, oh, I could do that. I can do CPR, right? And that honestly, that's what brought me back to full time. Knowing that people were going to be open to learning and making sure like there's somebody there that's going to be able to fill that need.
Yeah, I honestly think it takes a sense of servant leadership, because in the case of the film, if that armorer would have taken responsibility and not messed around, because she actually took some of the crew out there to like shoot off some of the firearms. If you're mixing live rounds with blanks and everything else, it's not going to end well. It's going to end up in a situation like you said where Brandon Lee died, and I think even way before that there was a famous actor who he had a revolver that had blanks in it, but if the armorer would have known what was going on, not saying they had the technology back then, I don't know, because firearms are changing from like revolver to semi-automatic probably around that time, but nonetheless, revolvers, a blank still has powder in it, and revolvers have a lot of pressure whenever they fire off a round, and that pressure is still going to go somewhere. So it ended up killing the man because the pressure went towards his head. But I honestly think that there needs to be a lot more servant leadership. People that are willing to do the research, that are willing to pick up the skills, learn safety, learn how to deal with people. I mean, just give back to the community in a positive way. We just had a police shooting down in Florida. Was it Florida? No, I think it was in Houston. It was Roger Fortson, the airman that got shot by the police officer in his own home. It was Florida. I remember now. It was Florida. Had there been so many different things done, especially seeing as how police are supposed to be servants for the community. So in a sense, there's, in my opinion now, this is just me, but in a sense, they're supposed to have servant leadership behind their actions, and they shouldn't have the intent to just go off and to just start shooting without knowing the full details of what they're getting into. Had there been more of that, then there could have been different outcomes. There could always be different outcomes. The shooting that happened in the Wendy's here, the first police officer that was on the scene, in my opinion, he had control of the whole situation. His partner was the one that was exacerbating the situation and made it worse than what it had to be. So it's like there's too much commingling of people that are, quote unquote, like I said earlier, in it for clicks and views, and then people that actually want to do something positive to help out the community. If there could be more free-form servant leadership, this place might look a whole lot different.
Man, I gotta say, I strongly feel, and this is after some experience with some police officers, but I strongly feel that being a police officer should be a master's degree. I am a St. Leo graduate, and St. Leo used to have an Atlanta center with 5 different locations: Fort Gillum, Fort McPherson, up at Dobbins, but they also had one at the police academy here in Atlanta. And so when I had classes with these police officers who were getting their other degrees, they were very different than the other, non-military or non-police people that were in the classes. And that mentality, when they were having to hit all of those requirements and all of that book work from doing the degree, added a different level of discipline that you don't get that from doing your physical fitness. You don't get that from wearing your uniform. I can't quite put a name on it. I'm sure there is one, but I imagine that the strategic thinking, not critical thinking, strategic thinking would be completely different if librarians have to have a master's degree. And we're talking about people who are having to make decisions about what type of force they're needing to use, or somebody's life, or what to do in an emergency situation. Not taking for granted that fight, flight, fawn, freeze, or flop will show up no matter what you're training. But that different level of being able to think through a situation and the strategy, we don't have that. And I think that is severely hurting the community.
I can definitely agree with that, and it always because I talked with a couple of military guys recently. We did a show on Roger Fortune, as a matter of fact. But they even mentioned the fact that whenever they're in the field in a different country, they are literally accountable for every single round that they have and every single action, because they're not only representing the United States, but they're also kind of teetering on a knife's edge, if you will, of like making sure that they don't create new enemies in the future. Because if, God forbid, something happens, they shoot a farmer or whatever, that farmer, no matter if he's like, on the lowest part of that society over there, he just grows corn or whatever, or like he's actually a very influential farmer, it's going to have an effect. And the people that we're amongst over there are going to remember that. I really think, actually, I don't even think it's just, it should be like that over here in America, because if you look at the tensions that are going on, you've got a lot of people that are like, I don't trust the police anymore. But they don't feel comfortable around the police. And I know historically in Black society it's been like that because of what police have done back then, but now it's like,
the police were not created to protect the community.
Right.
And we got into that post-World War era where things were a little bit different and they had to have a different brand. And I think that really has, that was 67 years ago, where that big shift in police corruption was. And so the communities are like, oh yeah, we've got a police guy. He's going to come and solve the problem. We know the marshal, Jim, and it's not like that. It isn't like that. So the heart of the organization, the public actually does not know what that is. We know what we hope it would be. But, what state was that passed that their police officers do not have the duty of civilians in a escalated situation? Was that Oklahoma, maybe? I gotta pull CNN back up, because I was just floored when I read that. Because why else are you here? You're supposed to be here to protect me. And no, they're not, which is quite devastating. But as active civilians, I'm actually on my way to go vote today. We can get trained. We can understand what's happening in our communities and in our primaries, and we can vote. And if I would say two things to anybody, especially in our community: get trained and vote. They both matter.
Gee, I think that's a pretty good closing statement then. Tricia, I really thank you for your time and your interview. Wouldn't mind having you back if you'd be okay with that. in the
Yeah,
future?
absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's always great to talk to you. You know, we can just get along and talk all the time. We have so much in common.
Yeah, nerding out
One
over
leader
this
to
stuff.
another.
Yeah. Well, before you go, can you tell everybody where they can find information about what you're doing and where they can support you at? Social media links, anything?
Yeah, absolutely. Of course, number one is going to be our website, Learn CPRATL. We are doing contract classes, community organization classes, as well as corporate classes. So you need to schedule somebody depending on the type of certification you need. I'm sure we'll be able to get that settled and set up for you.
Cool. All right. Well, I appreciate your time again, and definitely thanks for the interview. We'll be in touch. I'll see if I can find some topics you might be interested in hopping in on, or I'll just run them by you.
Very good. Very good. I'll see you soon. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you. You have a good one.
This the Black Powder Podcast, let's get explicit. We got the wisdom hitting targets with a marksman's precision. We're having fun in the booth, we're running gun for the truth. Every future black gun owner, we're spreading the news. We do it legal, we're moving regal and blessing the people. Some hopes for the culture, we keep it locked like guns in our holster. Holding it down as we're loading the rounds. If they were nervous back then they're gonna be scared of us now. Black Powder Podcast, we'll be back in a while.